So today's class is in some ways it's a very important section. But of course, everything is quite important. But today's, in some sense, is important because it is talking about the stages of yoga, of spiritual unfoldment, which comes in some this one at the end of the Lavana story, which we went through. But in some other books, it's towards the last part of it, like the Swami Venkateshananda's book. It's at the last part. But I thought I'll do it here because it is helpful for all of us to understand this stages. And one reason is because all of us may consider ourselves, like some of us may consider ourselves to be beginners on the spiritual path. Some of us may think of ourselves as being there for seasoned for many years. Or some of us may have been dabbling in and out, having some spiritual experiences and having some understanding, but then going back to our normal ways. But instead of seeing it as stages where one person is more advanced and another person is less advanced, we can actually think of it as states. Especially the first three of them, which I'll be focusing on today. These are states of our mind, of our understanding, where we come to certain understanding at some points. And until we get to this fourth stage, really, everything else is still part of the path. From the fourth stage onwards, one is more established in the truth. And from there can be stages as such, but until one reaches that fourth step, there is always potential downfall. That what they call as the fall of the yogi, or Yoga Vasistha, or as in it is said in Gita. But nevertheless, as it is assured in Gita and as it is assured here again in Yoga Vasistha, whatever spiritual effort one has made, whatever progress one has made in this path, it is never lost, because those aspects of one's practice will actually leave certain impressions for when the person is reborn to come back on the path. And that is why we sometimes see of stories of people who, by mere some words or mere some suggestions, they awaken to that full potential. Example is of Ramana Maharshi, where at the death of his father, he started contemplating that I'll also start faking or acting out the death. And as he started enacting that process of dying, he started questioning that even though the whole body seems numb and it is dying, this I principle, this I amness is still there. So that kind of helped, was a sudden thought that came in. And then it led him on inwardly. He didn't need any guru, or he didn't need any guidance as such. And so directly he was able to come to that state of inquiry. And with that same example, we see in other stories. One other story which I want to talk a little bit today about is that of King Janaka. King Janaka was a very wise king. He was a very knowledgeable, not just knowledgeable, he was just. He was also victorious and in his kingdom. He's quite an able king as such. And I narrated a little part of the story last time, but there are several versions on how he came to awakening. In the Yoga Vasistha, one of the story that is given is that of that he was walking by one day when he heard some sages talking. And these sages were talking and contemplating on the highest truth. So he heard them say things like, we contemplate that self which reveals itself as a pure experience of bliss. We contemplate that light that illumines all that shines. We contemplate that reality in which everything exists, to which everything belongs, from which everything has emerged, which is a cause of everything and which is everything. So those words actually stuck him quite strongly. And the story that I was narrating last time, in fact, if some of you weren't able to hear, I'll just repeat it again. So there is one story where Janaka was sleeping and he had a dream. And in that dream, he saw that he was defeated in the battle with another enemy king. And that enemy king spared his life but banished him out. He sent him out of his kingdom. So he was separated from all his closed ones, his family, his children and everything. And he went into another land. He kept walking for a long time and reached another kingdom. And he was tired and hadn't had food, anything. So he was begging for food. And he was told that there is a place, what we call here as Annakshetra, or a place where food is given to poor and needy people, sometimes sadhus and things like that. So there he goes, stands in the line, he waits for food, and different people get served that food. And when his turn comes towards the end, almost all the food is gone. There's only like one scoop of food at the bottom of the bowl. So that food is scooped out and in a bowl it's given to him. And the moment he gets that, it is said that a huge bird kind of flies from top and takes off some of the food and drops it falls down. And he starts wailing his ill fate, his luck. At this point, he wakes up from the dream. And being a wise king, having learned some scriptures and things like that, when his wife and others ask him what happened and all that, he says the dream. And then he starts asking this question, that what I dreamt, was that real? Or that I'm seeing now, is this real? And this question kind of haunts him so much. And you can actually imagine, like so many of us, when we have a dream, we just go through it and we say, okay, that was a bad dream, and we go on with our life. But for someone who was matured in his thinking, who had probably that samskaras from the past, he could not just take it as a simple experience. And it is said here that, he was similar to how that story is narrated in Yoga Vasistha text, that he became very inward and he was very thoughtful. He was no longer able to continue with his duties. People kept asking him to forget about that, but he was absorbed in that. And there are different versions. Some say that his guru Astavakra had to come in and give him the teachings, and some say that in this approach he started inquiring, and like he heard the word of the shastras, he heard the word of the sages, he contemplated on the shastras, and through his own inward inquiry, through his own inward contemplation, he started thinking about what is real, what is the truth. And being a mature thinker, he started contemplating on what is the sense of reality that persists through this dream experience, through this waking experience. And this is the teaching also in Mandukya Upanishad, that three states of awareness or three states of experience which we go through, which is the waking, sleeping, and dreaming. And that which lasts through this state is called the fourth state, or it is not technically the fourth state because it is that state which remains in all that state. So he kind of realizes in that sense Then there's also another story of King Janaka, that one time he read somewhere in the scriptures that realization is so instantaneous, has momentarily occurring in, like, when a person takes one step and takes it and puts it on, like when climbing a saddle of a horse, they have to put one step before they climb onto the horse. So he heard somewhere in the scriptures that the moment it takes for somebody to lift one step and put it on that saddle, by that moment, that time, one can be self-realized. So such words kind of gripped him, and he kind of started calling all the wise people in his kingdom and started telling them, if you tell me how I can get that, I will reward you. But if you don't, then I will put you in prison. So things like that, where he started, telling a lot of wise people to come in and take that challenge, until Ashtavakra comes in and kind of tells him how he has to go through that realization. He tells him first to leave aside his kingdom, leave aside his ministers, and follow him into the forest. And he promises him that he will tell him how he can get realization that instantaneously. So there is another story that goes with that, and eventually Janaka does get that kind of knowledge. The beauty of Janaka's life is he was a king, and he continued to be a king even after his wisdom. He was able to do all the duties that he was doing, maybe even much better than before. So he didn't have to become like a sannyasi, or he didn't have to become a vanaprastha or anything. He continued to be in the world. And so his example is taken a lot to show that how we can continue with our own life, with our own activities. Now, the other point of going into this steps of realization, or steps of understanding as it's called, is that these steps sometimes can be mistaken that we try to judge another person or another teacher based on these steps, or we try to evaluate somebody else where they are. While it is helpful sometimes to kind of see, okay, how a realized person behaves, but at the same time, in our common life, while evaluating somebody else, we should not take that kind of judgmental attitude. This should always be for ourselves. So we should make an effort to understand these steps so that we may benefit, and we can question what is missing in our life and where we need to kind of go through in our practices. So with that intention, I will kind of start now looking into these 7 steps. So these 7 steps are like a roadmap, it's like a guide on how one unfolds in one's spiritual journey. And for most of us, the first 3 steps are the most important, because that is where we have to make an effort to understand where we are and what we need to do and how to do it. Yoga Vasistha is quite unique in that sense that it does give these steps, because otherwise in most texts, especially Vedantic texts, it's clear, like either you are a Agyani or you are a Gyani. And in most yogic texts, either you are a Siddha Purusha or you are yet to attain that Siddhis. And either you have Samadhi or you don't have Samadhi. And if it is Samadhi, whether it is Savikalpa Samadhi or Nirvikalpa Samadhi. So those are most clear-cut categories. There isn't that depth of variation as it is in Yoga Vasistha. And based on this, a lot of people, and even today, a lot of like self kind of styled gurus and all, they use steps and say this is it. But a lot of it comes from here. A lot of people borrow this, and then they make different divisions based on this, based on their understanding and things like that. But if you can directly comprehend this, if you can directly go, this is the source of many things that come. And in fact, I've seen in a lot of Buddhist texts also, a lot of Buddhist texts which they say came later after Yoga Vasistha scriptures, they have taken certain elements, or they have there's a lot of similarity. So it's probably not right to say they're taken, but there's a lot of similarity. And so as these scriptures have lasted for a long time, it's quite possible that a lot of this wisdom must have come from here. Okay, so having said that, I will start. So the first step that is given in our in the book is called as, I'll tell you first the Sanskrit word. It is called as Shubaicha, which is literally means as Shubaicha. So basically Shubaicha means that one who has wise intention or wise desire or auspicious wish. How does this auspicious wish span out in our life? See, once this kind of stories of whether it's of Lord Rama or King Janaka, we see that they start somehow having a dispassion towards the world. They start seeing in the world some kind of inconsistencies, and these inconsistencies actually kind of make them feel that there is something more to the world than what they see. So, for example, like when we inquire into the world, into the nature of what the world is, and as we go through these experiences of the world, we at some point, most of us come to this intention that there is something missing, and we know that we can't find our fulfillment just in the world. It could be some based on someone dying, we see someone dying, or we experience our own some kind of misery in our life, we lose someone, or it could be that some desire that we have in our life is not fulfilled, or something, some relationship that doesn't satisfy us. So it could be anything, and we start seeing somehow that life is incomplete, and there isn't that in our material objects or in people, in situations, we don't find that happiness. The same thing happened to Lord Buddha, like he was living in a protected kingdom for so many years, where he didn't see any suffering. He didn't see anyone who was old as such. And so one day when he was taken out into the village, as he was going through the village, he saw an old person, and he started first time asking, like, am I going to get old like that? Is all my loved ones going to get old like that? And then he saw someone dead, a dead body being carried. And he started asking whether I too will die, whether my wife will die, my son will die. And then he also saw somebody suffering, of sickness. So that kind of dispassion aroused in him, that if this is the reality of life, then why am I pursuing this kind of life? So that kind of wise inquiry, that kind of wise things, it's actually called as Shubaicha, because it actually propels us towards positively seeking something better. That kind of negative outlook of life which is a reality of life, leads us to some kind of a positive wish. And this positive wish is to seek out scriptures, seek out satsanga, like how we are doing now. Seek to do more shravanam. We start getting this wish that we want to hear the truth. We want to be closer to the truth. And so this is called Shubaicha, wherein we become more positive. We start seeking that thing which is eternal, which is truth, which is lasting. And we take pleasure in this. So initially we were taking pleasure in all the things that is just momentarily giving us happiness in life. But now we start seeking pleasure in that which is more lasting, which is pointing us to the higher truth. So those kind of wish to seek that through satsang, through scriptures, that is part of the Shubaicha. And we can look at in our own life. Most of us at some point there is this intention that arises in us that we wish to hear this kind of truth. We wish to seek after this truth. Or we are happy to talk to people, who will talk more about us on this. So sometimes when you get interested in these kind of topics, you find it a little bit waste of time to be talking to somebody who is just talking to you daily about just politics or some worldly things or about some new entertainment that has come. Those kind of topics somewhat doesn't give you that same interest anymore. Although there's nothing wrong in doing things like that, but somehow we don't seek our complete fulfillment from that. We don't believe that will give us the joy that we are seeking in life, the happiness that we all innately are seeking. So that is the Shubaicha part. Now the second one I want to talk about, and which is here, is called as Vichara. Some call it as Vicharana. It is translated sometimes as just as self-inquiry, or it is also translated as association with the wise, with the shastras, and then continuity of the vairagya that I talked earlier about. So here the one of the text here, actually let me just read out here. It says that it is preceded by the association with scriptures and virtuous people, and the practice of dispassion, the inclination towards righteous conduct. But Vichara is also more where, how I was telling you this example of King Janaka, you start inquiring into the reality rather than the earlier part where you are looking at the non-reality. Like in the world that we see, the material objects and all that, we start realizing we've already realized at this point that those don't give us happiness for always. That is not lasting. That it is there for a moment, it is there for maybe a few days or a few years, but it's all not going to last. So that kind of wisdom has already come in. And now we are actually having inquiry into something deeper. So like Janaka hearing these words, I contemplate on that light which enlightens everything. I contemplate on that substratum, on that self from where all this experience comes. So that kind of truth you hear through classes like this or through reading in the scriptures, and it starts becoming your main part of inquiry. You start inquiring based on this. You start trying to see in your own experience. For example, we can at any moment in our experience, we can actually ask ourselves, when you are having some thought, right? You can just kind of see if you can become aware of that thought, and that sense of awareness, or what we call as I amness of that awareness, of that thought, it stays with you even though this object that you're thinking about goes. So for example, if I see this pen, this pen comes in my vision, and then this pen might go, but I as a seer remain, right? So that same kind of I amness, we can see. For example, if somebody shows you a picture of you when you are 10 years old, you immediately say, oh, that is me. But then you look into that mirror, that person is different, it looks different, the whole structure, everything has changed, and yet you look at this person and you say, I am this. So the sense of I am, which was there when you were 10-year-old, and the sense of I am which you have now is still there. So that is contemplating on the reality, that is contemplating on the true nature of our being. So this I am stays for always, So similarly, when we get when we get into reality, we start looking also into life with that objective. Now, for example, another way to look at it is if someone tells you, like, do you know that, of course, it's scientifically proved, but if, when it's pointed out to us that, do you know the moon is actually getting its light from the sun? Now, we don't believe when we look at that moon that the light is actually coming from the sun. But now what happens is, like, once we come to this understanding, when we look at that moon and we say, wow, the moonlight is so beautiful, at the background we will always have that awareness that this is not the light of the moon, but this is actually the light of the sun that is being reflected. So similarly, when we come to this understanding that our deeper nature, the deeper nature of self, is all pervading, and like has that mantra we chanted in the beginning, it is that substratum on which there is creation, there is sustenance and dissolution. And in fact, the third part of the mantra also talks about how it is that substratum of that seer and the seen, that what I feel as I'm the seer and that object which I'm seeing. So things like that, it is also that substratum of that the deed being done and the doer. So we can actually see that when any truth comes into our life, we have a sense of when some understanding comes into our life, right? Like we talked about this story of Lavana having hallucination and then being able to see it, where we realize that the mind is so powerful that if it has any intention or desire, that manifests, and whatever samskaras that we are carrying, that manifests again. So the ability to be conscious and aware of our thinking, our wishes, is very important. And so when we think like that, when we come to such understanding, then we can actually kind of contemplate in our own life what kind of intentions we have, what kind of deeper thinking which we have, which is creating our reality for us. So thoughts like that, and then again, other contemplations like I mentioned, like we can always kind of look at like when we're going through a bad experience, you are there as an experiencer. When you're going through a positive experience that you like, you enjoy, you're still there as an experiencer. So isn't there the sense of I am the same through all this experience? So such kind of contemplations and reflections are helpful. We can use that, we can hold on to that. Now I come to the third step, or the third stage, you can say, and this is important because this is almost a kind of direct experiential feel of our spiritual progress. And this is called as Tanumasana. Okay, so literally translated, Tanumasana means thin mind. Tanu is like thinning out. Tanumanasa is mind. It is translated as subtle mind, or what we say as sukshma, subtle nature of the mind. And it is also kind of comes as non-attachment to the objects. So non-attachment to sense objects, and it arises because of the subtle thinking, the vicharana which we were talking about, along with that positive intention, the Shubaicha, which the virtuous desire which we have for spiritual growth and progress. So this subtle mind is not necessarily, although we can actually say that it comes because of this good intention we have or a positive wish we have, and because of the inquiry we have done. But for many people, it can come just as an experience, like I can give you some example, like people who do yoga, for example, right? Sometimes they experience a certain pleasant sensations in the body when they're able to carry out the yoga. Like when they do pranayama, for example, that breathing, that gives them a certain fresh feeling in their body. And doing out the asanas, they experience And if they have this feeling of good feel in the body, which doesn't come no matter how many coffees you may drink or how many good foods or pleasurable food you have. That kind of experience is different. Spiritually also, for meditators, people who meditate, the yogic meditations and all that, they are able to experience certain sensations in the spine, certain tingling sensations at this point between the eyebrows or on the top of the head, or sometimes they have some visions. Sometimes they are able to hear certain vibrations in their right ear. They say the sound of Om, comes many times as vibration, and and many people living here in the Himalayas, and to some extent, I can relate to that. Is where just being in certain forest region, you hear a certain different vibration, a different humming sound, which you don't hear anywhere else. So there are a lot of things like that, and some people out of blue they get this experience. Some people get it as a part of their yogic practices. But this is a indication of the subtlety of the mind, that the mind becoming sukshma. They, on a negative side, sometimes also this plays out. And the way it plays out negatively is that some people who don't understand how to work with this, or who don't have a guru, or who don't have somebody wise enough to guide them through this, they also suffer from this because they become sometimes oversensitive. They hear like some sounds kind of disturb them, like too much loud sound, or like rock music or loud sounds that kind of disturbs them. Food, some food that is too strong in certain spices, or maybe some strong gross foods, because this subtlety, revolts everything that is gross. So what we call as rajasic and tamasic, especially tamasic stuff, it becomes very repugnant to them. So in our sadhus, for example, sadhus are told not to eat garlic, onion and stuff like that. And of course, it is well known that a lot of alcohol and things like that has, when the mind becomes subtler, naturally the interest drops for this person. So they drop those things very much more easily, because they are able to enjoy this subtle nature. And negatively also, that subtle things become so much of an important thing that they revolt against anything. They choose environments which are more pleasant because it helps them in their being able to go into more depth in the subtle nature. Like that is where nature helps them, like mountains, rivers, or even like once in a while they want to be near nature. So all this is part of subtle mind. And the importance of understanding this is also because some people immediately sometimes have a spiritual experience like that. Some spiritual experience, and they're not able to relate to that. Many times it is because of their past practices. Maybe not in this life, maybe in previous lives. Like even Ramana Maharshi, for example, he said when that the sense of inquiry started coming into him, like if I'm not this body, if I'm not this mind, who am I? Now immediately what he says is that question gripped him so much that the mind turned inward, what we call as antarmukhi. The turning of the mind inward on one's own self. And it became so strong that he lost all the sense of the body, he lost all awareness of the outside world, that perception of objects, everything went away. And so much so that he would sit for long hours in an underground place where all the rats, everything were biting into his flesh. But he was completely oblivious to that. So that is how this kind of depth of experience can suddenly awaken. But it's all together. So it's not necessary that somebody who has gone into Tanumasana stage, one has to have these experiences. That is what I'm saying. Important thing is actually to be able to do this vichara. It is able to look through the defects of the world and to be able to turn in through scriptures, through satsang, or through listening into the deeper reality. So that is important. And if possible, undertake some yogic practices or other things to help out with that. Experiences eventually are not that important. They can be signs, but they're not important. And this is where the fourth stage comes in. Fourth stage is called as Sattvapati. And from here, the person starts having a glimpse of the true nature of self, true nature of reality. And it is said that here it becomes a Brahmavid, the first stage of Brahmavid that is called, in the sense he's a knower of Brahman. He is a knower of the reality. So there is less chances of him falling back into the worldly stage at this point. Although it doesn't mean that he is completely free. He is still living, he is still interacting, he has problems with the body, he will have problems with the mind and other things still. But he has enough sense of reality of the truth. He has enough sense of knowledge of his own true nature. And then at that point, he's able to realize that experiences, no matter whether it's a good experience or a bad experience, whether it's a spiritual experience or it is a mundane, material, samsaric experience, he realizes they are just like coming on this TV screen, or screen of his mind. They come, they go. They are there for a while. Some are very gripping, some are very boring, but they all are coming and going. So that screen of movie, that's the television screen kind of image, always stays. He starts getting into that kind of reality. And his vicharana, his ability to do inquiry is also much stronger. So here he starts looking at anything. He doesn't necessarily need one guru at this point. He doesn't need some one scripture or one object to tell him. For example, there is a story in Srimad Bhagavatam of this person, Avaduta. It is called as Avaduta Gita. And in Srimad Bhagavatam, it is said that there is a yaksha, or there is a prince. We can take it as a prince who sees an ascetic in the forest. Not an ascetic like a sadhu, you can say. And he seems very happy and he seems very content, just lives by himself. And he observes him for a few days and sees that he seems much more happy. He seems much more comfortable with himself. Although he's alone, he's going through with whatever he finds, he eats. He's very content in his life. And he goes and asks him, "Can you tell me the secret? I've been observing you. Can you tell me what is your secret?" And he says that I have had in my life 24 gurus from whom I've learned these things. And this prince says, 24 gurus. He's surprised because usually it's like we have gurus here and there, and we generally say there is one Sadguru, one guru who points you. You have a personal connection. You have who is your direct one, who directly points you to that highest reality. This guru is different from like the guru whom you had as a teacher in school, or a guru who teaches you merely to do some yogic asanas or meditation. But this is a guru who's pointing you to the final truth. So he's not talking of any of those gurus. He's talking just, I've had this 24 gurus. When they ask, what is this guru? He starts saying, it's like, this guru is like, this earth has been my guru. This air has been my guru, because through earth I've learned how to be solid. Through water I've learned how to be fluid. And through the mountains, I've learned how to be like allowing everyone to kind of come on and be there as a stability. And he gives also, like he says, one time he learned something from a lady who was cooking. This in India is, ladies wear a lot of bangles, So this lady who was cooking had like many bangles on her hands. And as she was cooking, all the bangles were ringing on each other. And she said it became too noisy, so she started removing some bangles and she put it out, But still the noise was coming on as she was moving her hands and cooking. Eventually she left with 2 bangles, But even then there was sound coming. So she finally removed that, and there was only 1 bangle left. And then she was able to work, there was no sound at all. So he says that, so a real kind of ability to have peace or this harmony is when you are able to be alone and content in your life, Or rather, when you're not really having this need to have somebody else to make your life full. So all the time he's saying there is disturbance, in other words, and we can all see it, right? Like in any kind of relationship or anything, there's always some interaction. Of course, with spiritual people, it's a positive interaction. But most times, there will always be some things, and that's why a lot of spiritual seekers are taught to enjoy being alone. It is not a sense of loneliness, but it is a sense of aloneness, Yeah, so that's a good point. Yeah, so somebody had mentioned if you're not at ease with yourself, then you are in a state of disease. Yeah, very good. Yeah. So that is how sometimes life is, like if we have to be so that is that pointer that he learned, that to be comfortable with himself, so it's not a diseased state of mind he was in, so that's Avadhuta. That was the story of Avadhuta. And the reason I'm saying that is he reached a state of Sattvapati, Sat Utpatti, that sent a state of pure self. So I will go through the next 3 stages very quickly because I have a few minutes left. I want to finish this, and next class or next session I will elaborate a little bit more on that. But these are the higher stages now. Now we have already talked about that state of self, that Brahmavid. Now the next state is called as Asamsakti. Asamsakti is literal translation is non-attachment. But it is not so much of non-attachment from the object so much, because at this stage the person has already realized the futility of seeking worldly pleasures. It is rather, as I was telling in my other one Gita class, it's like you are no longer trying to detach, from the objects which are lower. You're trying to attach to something which is higher. So instead of trying to push away all the objects of the world, that bliss of seeking spiritual life, that bliss of higher happiness naturally detaches these from you. So the moment you go up to that higher nature of self, or the joy of divine bliss, of reveling in that godly state, then this state, which is that human state, drops away naturally. So that is really what Asamsakti is. It is that kind of non-attachment. Then there is this Padartha Abhavana, and the Sanskrit translation of this is Padartha. You can take it as objects or things. Abhavana is not there, absence of objects. And the way it is literally translated is it's like non-perception of the world. So one is in Samadhi, like as I was telling you this story of Ramana Maharshi being in Samadhi, and that even though rats were biting his own body, he didn't have a sense of that. So that could be Samadhi, but there is also a higher state of living where the person is operating in the world. He's seeing things, he's interacting with everything, but yet that sense of perception of the world doesn't have a reality. Rather than seeing the the absence of objects, he is connected more to the presence of that subject or the self, the divine self. So he's in that divine self, all these objects is coming and going. So another simpler way to taste this, right, is again, I was taking this pencil for example. When you look at this pencil, right, when you really see this pencil, let me ask you, do you see this pencil outside, or do you see, where do you experience this pencil? So anyway, I'll just tell you now, basically what's happening is when we look at this pencil, one is obviously we say this pencil is outside, right? But in reality, all these objects that we are seeing, there is something like the sense of I or the mind that is experiencing it. And the reason for this is very obvious, that how do we see dreams, or how even daydreaming, for example, right? We clearly, or let me say, like for example, I will say Ramana Maharshi. Now you have in your mind an image that comes of a person. Now I told that word outside, but that object or the person is experienced in your mind, right? In reality, what is happening to us is that we think all these objects that we are seeing is out there. I'm seeing this TV screen and I see all these 7-8 faces here. Now in reality, although I'm experiencing this outside, there has to be this inner awareness which is experiencing this, right? Because when we go to deep sleep or when we go to coma, we don't see these objects. So there is something inward that comes in and kicks in that helps us to see these objects inside. And this I can give you as an homework. You can try out, like, you try to see some objects outside and try to get into not like the active thinking, but in a contemplative state, to kind of try to, like for example, if you see a mountain, right? See that mountain, close your eyes, and then see if you can experience that mountain in your mind, right? And now open your eyes again and try to see that mountain that you're seeing. Where is it experienced? And most likely you will actually try to get more and more this feel of this inner sense of perceiver. So this is in a way how this saint, one who has realized, sees the world, that although he's seeing these objects, everything, he knows that it is being experienced within him, or in the consciousness, as we call it, the deeper substratum. So initially we can experiment this as seeing it in the mind, but for him, I had told you this thing of how Chit Akasha and Chidakasha, are two entities. Chit Akasha is what we experience in our mind. So for us, we can experiment with our mind these things, but for him, the distinction between Chit Akasha is not there. It's only Chidakasha. It's like the pure space of consciousness. So everything comes and arises for him in that. So that is the Padartha Bhavana state, And then now the last state, which is called as Turyaga. And this is also talked about in Mandukya Upanishad, where it is one of the Upanishads where it is introduced, the state of Turiya, and the seventh mantra, Nantav Prajnam Na Bahish Prajnam, in that it says Satyam Advaitam, Satyam Shivam Advaitam Chaturtam Iti Manyante Sa Atma Sa Vigneyaha, it says. It is like that fourth, it is called as the fourth. It is fourth in relation to the states of the other three, which is waking, sleep, and deep sleep. Waking, sleep, and dreaming. So this is that fourth state, but it's not like a fourth different state. It is that state that pervades all state, So that's called as the Turyaga. And so here, once one has reached this point, like, he has no longer any, he's a Jivan Mukta, he doesn't have to come back, he's free from all, even in living, although people perceive him as living, he himself doesn't experience his body. So even the pain they go through, like all the saints, like Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, and many, exalted divine beings, they just enact and do what they have to do, but they don't really believe that they're going through this body, because they become this Jivan Mukta, And one of the explanations given to that is where, by the long practice of the above 6 steps and by non-cognition of differences, that abidance which takes place in one's being is known as the 4th state of consciousness. So this is the overall journey of a sadhak, or anyone who is intending to take to spiritual life. Now, I wanted to just quickly go through this because there are a lot of things that we can talk about, and there's a lot of important points in this. What I wanted you all to do is, if possible, you can actually look it up or look through and dwell on this. And one is to actually see in our own experience, especially the first 3. That is the most important, as I say again, because although we want to have a vision of the other 4 steps, the first 3 is where we can exercise our inquiry, our sadhana, our practice. And we can also see, like, are we deficient in things like, are we deficient in scriptures understanding? If so, are we deficient in having satsang with people who can leave those positive impressions in our mind? Because we're always collecting impressions, daily, in our material life, in our worldly life. So initially, like, if we are not making any effort, we should try to see that we'll at least put in 1 hour a day, for spiritual practices or spiritual study. And if possible on weekends, try to read something. And slowly, as you become a little more matured sadhak, you can try to slot in 2 times, like morning and evening. So all that, which we can try and do. And of course, you can ask for some people who are wiser. You feel they can give you some inputs. And then the other part of this is also to understand that there is certain aspects of these steps which you have strengths in. So like as I said, like if you have some subtle aspects in some area, for some people, as I mentioned to them, some people are very sensitive to some feelings, for example, like negatively what happens is they quickly perceive the feelings of others. And when somebody is in a bad mood or negativity, that energy kind of makes them very disturbed, So if something is like that's taken in negatively, from a spiritual sense, it's actually positive. It can be harnessed. It can be channelized properly. So we have to find that, especially those strengths which you have, those areas where you have had some experience, and then almost like a careful analyzer or something, we weigh these pros and cons, and we can try to strengthen that aspects and use that to work against any negative deficiencies we have.